everyone, and welcome to day 4 of the 2023 State of Medical Device True Quality Summit series. I should introduce myself. My name is Laura Court. I'm a medical device guru here at Greenlight, and I am going to be moderating our wonderful panel today. So it's wonderful to have everyone jumping in and joining us. Good news, it is not too late to get your free copy of the 2023 MedTech Industry Benchmark Report. You can check out the MedTech Excellence community where you'll get free access to this report, as well as be able to engage in conversations with today's speakers, as well as additional peers. If you did not catch yesterday's session, you can access all of the recordings on the replays of those different sections on the website as well. We are going to keep the ball rolling today with another loaded session about how electronic data capture is transforming the MedTech industry. With us, we have 3 industry experts in the field. We are welcoming Rihanna Toten, a medical device clinical research expert. We have Adam Don Lang, a director of clinical affairs at Veriskin Inc. And we have Jan Bergsteinson. You can make a face if I did not pronounce that correctly, director of EMEA sales at Smart Trial by Greenlight Guru. This session will run for 35 minutes with about 10 minutes allotted for questions at the end. If any questions come up throughout the presentation, please ask in the Q&A section of the chat on the right-hand side, and we'll get to as many of those as possible. We will be answering the questions that we do not get to in the MedTech Excellence community following the session. There is a link in the chat for you to access the community. I'll be dropping that here in just a moment. Last few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded and you can access it on the virtual summit website following the event. Additionally, if you would like an attendance certificate, you can request this on Greenlight Guru Academy, where you'll find instructions on the virtual summit website or in the follow-up email that we'll be sending out soon. As far as housekeeping goes, those are our key items there. So without further delay, I would love to give each of our presenters an opportunity to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about your background before we jump into our questions for today. So Rihanna, I would love if we could start with yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm being in the clinical field for 14 years now, from pre to post-market studies for medium to high-risk medical devices. In addition to that, I'm also an active member of the Medical Research Ethics Committee in the Netherlands, where I'm based. And so I have my own company where I provide training and consultancy dedicated to support clinical research with medical devices. Where it's my mission to transfer my knowledge and experience to help clinical research professionals to find practical solutions on the interpretation and implementation of the EU MDR and ISO 14155 by translating it into their daily practice. It's my motto, actually, that in reality, not everything is black and white.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for looking very forward to what you are going to talk with us today about. Wonderful.
Thank you
and next we have, absolutely. Next we have Autumn.
Thank you. My name is Autumn Lang. I am based out of Germany, near Munich. I've been here for, wow, I think over 13 years here, but in Germany over 20 years. And basically in clinical affairs, specifically for medical devices, not IVDRs, not pharma. And really has worked in the industry, but also for clinical research organizations and as a consultant. And really, for me, medical devices are borderless. So we go wherever the device needs to go. In regards to different classes of devices I've worked on, I was thinking about the other day, for me, my mission in working in clinical affairs really is to develop innovation that brings true progress to people. So regardless of what positions I have had and what devices I've worked on, that's really what we're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. Perfect. And last but certainly not least, we have John.
Hello, everyone. My name is John, originally from Iceland, but I've been living here in Copenhagen, Denmark for quite a number of years. Founded Smart Trial back in the day, been working with this MedTech industry is supporting medical device companies with their clinical data collection throughout the last decade or so. Now, most of the time, I'm very occupied with sharing the industry experience and insights that we've gained throughout the years with the rest of the industry. And fun fact, I got the black belt in karate, but I've actually not had to use it to date. So that's just one of the things I like to keep in the cabinet, and a diploma on the wall to keep safe.
Wonderful. Well, we trust that you'll update us all if there's ever a situation where you have to use it, because I'm sure everyone now wants to know that a situation ever happens. Wonderful. Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. I will not keep anyone waiting here. Let's go ahead and jump into our questions for today. So question number 1 that we have is, clinical evaluation is a critical process for many medtech companies. Why do some medtech companies perform clinical studies and others do not? Leave it open. Whoever would like to start, Autumn or Rihanna, if you would like to. Rihanna, if you'd like to jump in as well. Whoever would like to get us off.
Sure. I think that clinical evaluation is indeed the fundament to show clinical evidence for the product claims. So this valuable information concerning the safety and performance that is generated from the use of the medical device can be derived from multiple sources. So like peer-reviewed scientific literature, post-market surveillance, post-market clinical follow-up data, clinical investigation data from equivalent devices, but also clinical investigation data from the device itself. So when you have sufficient clinical data on the safety and performance of your device from the literature and maybe post-market surveillance data, you do not necessarily need to perform a clinical investigation, only when you identify a gap in clinical evidence to prove a certain claim. So having this said, clinical investigation data from the device itself is mandatory for implantable devices, as well as class 3 devices, except if you can demonstrate equivalence with another device, which can feed your technical dossier with clinical investigation data from that equivalent device. However, we all know that demonstrating equivalence is very hard, as you must demonstrate similarities and identical features on biological, technical, clinical aspects. And for that, you need full access to the technical dossier of the equivalent device. So you can understand that the only option I can think of to get access to this confidential information is when you're either the owner of the equivalent device. For instance, if your equivalent device is a previous version of the concerned device, or if your company has acquired the company owning the equivalent device. I would not see any other option to have an agreement with a competitor device company for granting access to such confidential information.
Yeah, and I just wanted to highlight that there is actually another option, and that is unfortunately, a lot of innovative startups, they mismanage for whatever reason. So sometimes I've actually been in situations where we're able to go to those bankrupt companies and obtain the patent, right? So you're able to see, okay, what can we salvage because they were working on this before we did. So that's something for innovators that they really need to look at the horizon as saying, okay, who's done this before? Maybe their information is available and maybe they were able to get specific data. But that is just an option. But going back to the original question as to why some people need to do, we are in MDR today, okay? And I think everybody knows that. So when it was the MDD, yes, we had a lot of ways and pathways where we didn't have to have our own clinical data, even for class 3 devices. And I'm not proud about that. But being in the industry for over 20 years, that actually did happen. That won't happen under the MDR. That's why, one of the reasons why MDR was created. So it goes back to understanding the story, and the story is you need to demonstrate clinical benefit, okay? And I don't care what risk device class you are in. It is basically, that is the story. Here in Europe, and it will be it's not going away. It's going to be consistent, and it's going to be more reliable, getting more information on how to achieve to achieve that for the notified body, and etc. So I strongly recommend that people stop moaning and get moving.
I think to answer the question, you also need to look at the regulatory pathways, right? You both talked about that equivalence. And when you look at the US market, you have the same setup. You have different regulatory pathways that you take to get your market approved. That doesn't mean that you are home free, that not to do a clinical study. Depending on the type of pathway you choose, there are different requirements for acceptance or approval of sufficient evidence or clinical justification claims. And for example, most common question that we hear from medtech startups, and I think you can all agree with me, is that, do you think I need to do a study? It's like a yes or no question. But it's not as easy in that. And the reason why some companies are having to do studies and others not is not because there's somebody told them to do. It's very much based on how you have decided to justify your market approval pathway in terms of the different aspects that you need to document.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and to me, I think there's a higher level than just regulatory, because that's mandatory, right? That's required. But for reaching as many people as you want to try to reach as quickly as possible, it really comes down to commercialization and what your marketing strategy is.
Exactly.
And saying, okay, I don't need this for regulatory purposes, or I do need it for regulatory purposes, but at the end of the day, they want to sell. And how are they going to sell? You have to show clinical benefit. You have to be able to show that there is a market need, and what the value is of your device. So
I think that part is actually becoming increasingly more important for a lot of medical device companies and medtech companies in general, to conduct studies, not to just get through the regulatory pathways, but actually to show that it works. It works better than what the physicians or the users are either used to.
Yeah, and also by doing your own clinical investigations, you give the the physicians a way to get experience with the device, but also your patients. How do they respond? So this is the best way to check on that. The only
and innovation doesn't necessarily mean that you've invented something new in regards to all these new screws and whatever. It may be something the technique or the user who's using it. So yeah.
Exactly.
So it sounds like you have to do a little bit of your own kind of deep dive, not as you mentioned, just into regulatory, but into pretty much every aspect of your device in order to determine whether you need a clinical evaluation or not, or whether it would be beneficial.
No, you need to have an excellent clinical affairs person.
Absolutely.
To determine that
just
strategy.
To add to that, we actually had a webinar 10 days ago here at Greenlight and Smart Trial, where we talked about some of these strategies when it comes to clinical strategies, but also program development. I think it might be helpful for some of the attendees to take a look at that if you didn't watch that as well.
Absolutely.
We'll drop a link here in the chat.
Yes, and that recording should be up within the Academy. And I know I have others watching who can correct me if I'm wrong, but if we can pull that link for you, we'll certainly send it out as well. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Very informative on our first question. To move us along, we'll jump into our second one here. What are common challenges that medtech companies face when it comes to clinical operations?
They don't have anybody.
Money is a big issue. That is true. Money is probably it's always money. That's always first. I think we could just scratch that off. It's like money is always an issue.
Yeah, and then it's also time consuming. So it takes a long time before you get to data. And I think maybe even worse, they often create a burden for the participants. That's what I think. Because they have to come for additional visits to the hospital, etc. That might also be, the challenges that they're facing.
I tend to hear a lot about challenges related to agreements with sites, recruiting hospitals or clinicians to participate, making them happy. So a key opinion leader strategy from day one is very important. taking care of your clinical affairs is one thing, but you need to treat your customers. For medical devices, the customer is usually a clinical site or clinical company of some sort. Sometimes it's off-the-shelf product that you buy in the market, out in the store and in the pharmacy. But you also need to remember, when you're doing preclinical studies, pre-market studies, for example, that during that process, you are interacting with potential buyers, your potential future buyers or influencers that can impact sales of or commercialization of your device. So a lot of companies just think that every single physician, or have the opinion that a physician was always ready to take a look at a new device, but that's not the case. You need to sell it. Like, you need to sell it from day one to the physicians that you're going to be interacting with in your clinical investigations.
Okay, that hasn't been my experience. All of this, my experience has been that they've always been treated with velvet gloves.
That's because you've been involved, Autumn.
Oh, okay. No. It's not because I've been involved. It's really because of marketing and sales, and the decision makers in the company. They were more focused on making sure that these physicians are very happy, and we were very neglected, and we were seen as roadblocks and etc. That has changed, though. That has changed because marketing and sales, commercialization, reimbursement, they understand, oh no, she's here to help us. She makes me look really, really good. But that wasn't the case before. Now, yes, I definitely feel that our position has definitely changed. But that's because we're also providing them the data to fuel the value pitch that they're having to now sell.
What about recruitment? I mean, one of the things that I tend to hear a lot of from pharmaceutical networks is recruitment has always been a huge issue for pharmaceutical trials, getting the right sample size in. Have you two seen similar issues within medical devices? I know that from the studies that I've observed, sample sizes are not comparable to what you see in pharmaceuticals, but have you experienced multiple cases where that is a big challenge?
Yes, because we're working with very special populations, and I actually work very closely with biostatisticians, trying to figure out, do I really have to have exactly this number? Because what if in real life, it really is that this special population, I'm not going to get that. So statistically, we've had to be very creative and get very creative in saying, okay, the sample size, we have to modify it, because in real life, we're not going to be able to get under this microscope of inclusion exclusion criteria, that number within a time period before our money runs out, because that's what we're working against, where we're saying, I don't have 2 years to enroll this special population. And that's a challenge for innovative device manufacturers, because yes, they are working on very specific patient populations. It's not like somebody takes the pill and that's what the outcome is. No, medical devices, the outcomes are so different.
Yeah, and if I also may add, is that, for medical devices, especially if you have implantable devices, you only have, let's say, one time, one go. So if you have a lot of competition, let's say in the pacemaker world, for instance, you can just only put in one pacemaker. Once they have them, they are ready for, let's say, 10 years or even longer. So you have only one shot with those patients, and you have to have, like, let's say, the best medical device compared to the others. And there is competition. So you really need to show to the investigators, but also to the patients, okay, this is the best trial for you to participate in, and the less burden for you as well to participate in.
I mean, another common challenge is, of course, also the compliance part, making sure that your investigations, your study activities are according to ISO 14155, planned out, quality assurance during the study, and also laid out ethically in line with what is expected of the the organization. And that's why having individuals, for example, like you two, has been very important for a lot of companies. But clinical affairs experts have not been a common title or role to have within a lot of companies, because of the fact that a lot of companies have got to market through predicate devices and equivalents. They've had to rely much more on clinical writers or experts within scientific matters to make sense of data instead of actually planning and conducting studies. Do you think it's a real challenge right now for the industry to find those experts that are in managing, clinical data collection, planning, study planning, protocol designs? Is there a lack of experts?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think actually where I'm based, there are a lot of experts there. On the other hand, there's also a lot of demand. So once you're committed for a company, then you're gone. You're committed.
Yeah.
So yeah, but there are a lot of experts in the Netherlands where I'm based, in Europe where I'm working with. But yeah, it's not as much as I think with pharma companies, pharma-minded people.
I think it comes down to people don't want to pay. So people who have longer time experience, because you need time to gather all the different projects you've worked on. And so what I see is actually a lot of younger, unexperienced people being hired to do what we do. And that's where we extend a hand out to them saying, okay, we realize you are in a very difficult situation. Some guidance, mentorship, training. And so some of these budget conscious CEOs, then that's what we recommend and say, hey, you hired somebody directly from the university. They've never worked on a medical device. They don't even understand the whole design development, the whole life cycle. I said, these are things that they need training on.
Absolutely. And we had a comment come in, and not so much a question from Becky, who's listening in. And it's very interesting because I'd say it's something that I've probably noticed more, but she said, in their experience, the clinical affairs role often gets lumped with RAQA, especially if there's no one on the team with previous clinical affairs experience. I know in previous companies I've worked in, clinical's just wrapped up in both of those. Have you also seen those as well?
Oh yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I've seen it because we're interacting with the manufacturers that are looking to start initializing clinical activities, and very often the first people to reach out to us are director of RA, QA, and clinical, same person for all three areas. It's very common.
Yeah. No, my experience has been regulatory experts and quality experts. They don't want to touch it. They're like, I don't want to even think about no. So that's been my experience, that no, they don't want to touch it.
I think it's like more operational work, right? It's more in the field, it's more knowing exactly what you said, having the experience when working with investigators, with sites, with KOLs. You need to know how to reach them, how to squeeze them, how to cooperate with them, how to define your clinical investigation design, what works, experience with recruitment issues, etc. That is something I think you really have to have experience in the field on how to deal with that. And that is not typically RAQA work. But I do understand that with limited budget, with limited employees, that you try to squeeze it all in one person. And then you have to choose, where is your expertise?
So it sounds like, to wrap it all up in one answer, it sounds like what you're both are saying is that there's a big challenge with medtech companies not recognizing the fact that they need to have experienced people in clinical affairs.
Yeah, and like indeed Autumn said, it basically comes down to the budget. So because you have to pay for experience, yeah.
Always. Well, I know we could continue. We could have an entire hour just to talk about some of the challenges that are seen, but we certainly have quite a few more questions to get to. We actually have a poll coming out for everyone listening in here. I'm going to go ahead and get this launched. We're asking about what data collection tool are you planning to use for any upcoming clinical studies that you have. So you should see that coming towards you here soon. I'm going to leave that open for a few minutes, but we have a visual to go with our next question. So let me go ahead and get that pulled up as well. Perfect. So our next question is diving into the 2023 survey found that 44% of commercialized companies are using outdated tools such as paper and spreadsheets to manage their clinical operations. What are the dangers of using spreadsheets to manage clinical data?
Oh, who wants to start?
Kind of a loaded question. I know there's a lot going into that one.
Okay,
Yeah.
I can start with what I've seen, because this is an area that I've been involved in quite a lot from the vendor side of things for a while. I cannot count how many Excel spreadsheet examples I've received from MedTech companies, well-established MedTech companies, or copies of paper for review and feedback. I've also visited numerous offices where I've seen stacks of paper. I remember distinctly one time when I was in a country where they were getting data from a study from Japan, and they were piling it up in a storage room at the office. They were showing it to me, and they were like, "Yeah, we got a CRA coming in a month to transcribe all that data into a database so we can start analyzing the results of it." And I was stunned. I've also sat on the table from the other side as a data entry specialist in a clinical trial and done the same work. So I totally get the work that's needed to be done to gather data, but it still amazes me to this date in 2023, sorry, that there are still so many medical device and medtech companies in general that are using traditional tools. But I think a lot of it has to do, like Autumn and Rian mentioned there also before, it has a lot to do with cost. People under the impression that paper is cheap, Excel is cheap, it saves a lot of money. It doesn't take a chunk out of my budget, being a service that I need to acquire.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think it'd be interesting to throw in some of the answers that we're getting from the poll here at the same time while discussing this. Right now, we're pretty evenly split across the board. So first option, general purpose tool, we're getting about 14% of people coming in using paper, Excel, SurveyMonkey, different areas along those lines. About 28% that are on with us today are using an electronic data capturing system. 26% aren't necessarily sure, and about 32% don't have an upcoming study coming up. So we're kind of spread out as far as who's using what, or if they have activities coming up, but there are still quite a few using some general purpose tools.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
wow.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I would say in my experience now, the last 5 years, I haven't had to do any paper. It's all been EDC, and this is very small companies to this little startups that understood that your data needs to be somewhere, right? Because obviously you want your device to evolve, design and development. So that data needs to be evolve as well. So that's where I was able to make sure that we stop using paper yeah. I mean, seriously, last 5 years. So for me, I would expect a higher number of people using electronic case report forms. EDCs, everybody's been doing actually. Well, not actually. In the past, for me, we were doing things on paper, the case report form, and feeding it into an EDC system. So that has actually been done much longer, and it's only been very, very little amount of people using Excel, where my worst experience, my worst nightmare with Excel was you couldn't you couldn't find where the error was. You knew that the error was there somewhere, and I just felt like, why am I spending my time doing this, figuring this out? So, and this was always at the end of the study. Okay, you didn't find this out until the beginning. It was at the end, and everyone's like, "Where's the report?" I'm like, "I can't finish the report. We can't even spit anything out to a statistician because I'm trying to figure out where this error happened." So, maybe Rihanna, you have other experiences, but
Yeah,
I'm
well,
not going back.
as going from a monitoring part, you don't know where you started and where you ended. And if in the meantime there has been a change has been made, you don't know where and who did that. So there's no audit trail. So if any changes happened, then you can't find where and why was it done and who did this. So it's a nightmare to monitor if you're doing monitoring on an Excel. So yeah, from my point of view, and this is also, if you're in the MDR, you would definitely need to follow harmonized standards like ISO 14155, and where it's explicitly said that you have to have a validated system, and which has an audit trail where you can log the changes, who did this, when did it happen, who and why. And this is a key finding in regulatory inspections. And then another thing is that how do you have a secured access for the people who are doing the data entry? You want to have it secured that the data is not going everywhere, and that's impossible for spreadsheets to incorporate. So for me, and I haven't seen Excel for a really long time. So for me, it would be new if I would be visiting a company where they're using Excel as a or spreadsheet as a managing.
I think you're right. There are more companies now using or trying to decide between, should I use paper or should I go fully digital? In terms of digital, they usually recognize the fact that it needs to be validated. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the ISO standard requires it to be. But I think a lot of people are now making the choice between using paper going forward or another validated solution based on the fact that it is believed that it has a lot to do with cost. That cost is reduced by using paper.
And that kind of leads us well into our next question, because I know we've gotten a couple questions come in at the same time around this. So we've been referencing EDC, or an electronic data capturing system. Can someone, and actually, John, I'm going to throw this towards your question because of Smart Trial. Can you tell us a little bit more about what an EDC is and how MedTech companies can use that tool throughout product lifecycle?
So traditionally, an EDC is, like Autumn described, a centralized manner to receive data input that is collected through a clinical study. But throughout the years, it has migrated much towards offering data capture capabilities as well. You often hear electronic data capture combined with electronic case report forms, or which are basically digital questionnaires for physicians. And then you might sometimes also have electronic patient-reported outcome functionality combined with this, which enables patients to answer questionnaires. But essentially, electronic or clinical data capture systems, or e-clinical systems, there's a lot of different names for these solutions, are essentially created to enable companies to gather clinical data in a compliant manner throughout the clinical investigation. And MedTech companies can utilize this throughout the life cycle in different phases and stages of the life cycle. But most prominently, it is used in either pre-market settings for clinical investigations or in post-market surveillance settings in terms of clinical follow-up or post-market authorization or post-authorization studies, for example, in the FDA.
Right. And so in preparing for today, I specifically looked at 2 studies that we did on a project in the design development phase. The first one, before I started at the company, they did paper. Okay, so we looked at what the budget, the times, et cetera. And then we compared it with when we're just cleaning the data of the study that we did with the EDC or ECRF system. And we basically found out that we had less missing data. Ha ha ha, that was great. That versus when they had the paper. And the other one was fewer errors in queries. And the last one was from the time that they needed to clean the database to having the report, they needed 9 times longer on the paper-based, the one that we had. And this was the exact same product. But it wasn't until we were done with the study that we were able to show that. Okay, so you have to have them trust you and say, hey, there's a reason why I'm doing this. And at the end, I will show you, I will demonstrate that it does this. But we wouldn't be in clinical affairs if there weren't studies on this. So in Berlin, there was a randomized study that showed paper versus ECRF. And they basically also summarized efficiency, data quality, patient utilization, much better. So it's not just about the money, but that's just a clear demonstration.
So Autumn, why do you think that there are companies still not using an EDC?
They don't have a clinical affairs person. They don't have a clinical project manager. If they did, the clinical project manager would make sure that they demonstrate and have transparency on what the budget would be. And that's another thing, is a lot of the people have never seen a budget for putting together a ECRF EDC system. So for them, absorbing the cost and time of using a paper, they only see that towards the end then when we're rushing to get everything finished and going, oh my gosh, all this stuff needs to be looked at. So.
Absolutely. So the real question around this is then, what can be done to help further facilitate implementation of digital or validated tools to assist medtech companies with their clinical data?
Hire a consultant.
Well, I think first is education, just like we're doing today. We're sharing our experiences with peers in the industry that have been doing this for a number of years. Education is number one up there in the to-do list. That's also why it's so important to recognize that the medtech startup ecosystem is a crucial element of making this whole industry a success, because if we don't take care of our startups, we'll never have a better healthcare system. So a big part of that is to educate those companies early stage, in including clinical operational expenses, for example, in their budgets. So one thing that we do a lot of here, for example, at Greenlight, is to participate in those kind of events. But I think in the end, when it comes down to it, you can't really force anybody to do this. You really just need to explain, what are the pros and cons. And that's why, people like Autumn and Rian are doing what they're doing best. That's what you guys, or you do when you go and meet these companies. You explain how the budget works and how that can affect you in a positive and negative manner. I don't think there's even necessarily a magic answer to that.
Yeah, it remains a challenge. Budgeting a clinical trial, it should be seen as an ongoing exercise throughout the course of a trial. There are always hidden costs or unforeseen costs, but that is something that indeed, as you have an experienced clinical affairs person can point out at the beginning, okay, we have to keep an additional budget for unforeseen situations where you have delayed study starts, enrollment rate changes, huge facility overhead fees, those kind of issues you're running with. You have to be aware of this, and it's always going to be a struggle.
Absolutely.
A challenge, yes.
Isn't everything with medical devices just in general? What's fun without a little bit of challenge thrown in?
That's
Perfect.
medical devices. That's why we're not in pharma.
Exactly. Perfect. Well, we do still have a couple minutes here left, and I have a couple last questions certainly that we want to make sure we cover. One of the big questions that has been asked is, what are some of the key differences between a general EDC system and also a medical device EDC system? And that also ties into a degree some of the difference between a quality system and a data capturing solutions as well. And I think, John, I'm going to throw this one over to you first, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so traditionally, if you look at pharma and maybe biotech as well, they've been using digital solutions for the clinical operations for decades. I think even some of the first personalized computers back in the 70s, they were already used in clinical trials at that point. So pharmaceuticals have been racing this industry. They've practically created a whole ecosystem of solutions around clinical operations. And because of the fact that a lot of MedTech companies haven't had to, or have been able to bypass some of the needs of conducting clinical studies, it has resulted in a lot of the industry that is creating these solutions having bypassed the MedTech industry as a whole. So it has primarily been larger corporates, MedTech companies that have been acquiring solutions for their operations. And that has led us to solutions have been dedicated in terms of listening to their customer, which is most of the time pharma, and designing interfaces and operations and budgets and licensing options that are designed for those type of clients. But I think we can all agree on that conducting a study for medical devices and MedTech in general versus pharma is very, very different. Like Otto mentioned before, the data that you collect differs quite a lot. And the type of study design that you have differs also quite a lot. So to meet that requirement, you need to enable MedTech companies to be very much in power of what they're trying to do in terms of the data collecting. So you need to enable, first of all, a high flexibility. You need to be able to conduct non-randomized studies, randomized studies, multi-center, single center, small, big, a lot of variables, few variables, questionnaires, not questionnaires, connecting to devices, not connecting to devices, tracking adverse events based on the standard provided by the FDA or European regulation, making sure that a system meets the compliance requirements in the specific GCP standard for devices. And I can go on and on. So there are features related to that, but also the way that you just use and implement the system internally. I think one of the biggest factors that the values that we tend to proclaim with our customers, because we've been doing this for quite a while, is that when people start working with SmartTrial, you're not just working with a general solution. You come into a family of services that are dedicated towards helping the MedTech industry. So what you're using now is not what you might be using in 3 years, because we'll continue to listen to the MedTech industry and aligning the services towards that area.
Absolutely.
I can't add anything else. You already covered everything.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, I know something very interesting that I would love to hear from all three of you about. What's the biggest improvement that you've observed in clinical data management over the past, say, 5 years?
Yeah, when preparing for this, I was really thinking about it. Okay, what happened in the last 5 years? And I think the biggest thing that happened was the pandemic. With the COVID situation, how do we run trials? So for me, the biggest improvement is that pairing an EDC with a fully decentralized clinical trial technology. That was for me the biggest improvement, because this combination incorporates all clinical trial data components, from e-consent forms to scheduling, televisits, and data from devices, consumer wearables, patient apps. This combination has the potential to import real-world data, e-source data, and you conduct automated edit checks to ensure the quality of the data. So you can keep running your clinical trial while being in a pandemic. That was for me the biggest improvement.
Yeah, for me was the patient utilization. Because of the pandemic, we were doing studies where the patients had to use their mobile phone and really like every couple of hours report back to us saying, okay, this is what I'm fill out the survey, whatever. And that really opened my eyes, saying we haven't been using that technology as much as we should have. And so that is really made it more normal for us to say, yeah, they're going to use their own mobile phone. They're going to be able to do this and this with it. Or we're going to provide them a mobile phone. Those were things that I had heard that they were doing in pharma, but we weren't necessarily using it as much. But once the pandemic hit, we totally use that. But that goes back to the other question before, for me, was the cost issue. And that was where I really like to work with med tech companies who are in this area of EDC, because they understand the pricing has to be different. We can't afford it. We don't have pharma budgets ever.
I think the speed of digitalization based on the COVID pandemic is definitely a huge factor. But I also think that people's mindset towards buying into service or solutions that can be brought into the organization through web-based interfaces has also been a huge change. One of the biggest improvements that I've seen throughout the last 5 years is that people have stopped asking for, is it in the cloud? For example, is our data going to be in the cloud? People have actually started to trust that concept of you can actually store clinical data in the cloud securely. So there's this mindset of the digitalization that has been accepted throughout the whole world.
Absolutely. And I think that leads us very well into kind of our last wrap-up question that we have time for today. And that's, if you were to give advice to a young medtech company, I know we have quite a few listening in today. I've seen some of the names that I recognize there, on what advice would you give them on how to succeed with their clinical operations? What would be your number one tip? And I'd love to hear from all of you. So Rihanna, I would love if we could start with yourself.
I think Leon already mentioned it. I think it's educate yourself. Make yourself experienced and knowledgeable on. There are so numerous amount of guidelines, standards to follow that help you through the steps to be compliant with the regulations. I think if you educate yourself on, what is needed, that would be my number one tip.
Wonderful. And Autumn, do you have anything additional as far as what your number one tip would be?
Yeah, I think identifying that you have a need, that you need clinical affairs or clinical project management, that is very distinctly different. So identifying that you have a need and then get that assistance. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think my advice would be very similar to Rian's. Participate in conferences. I can't highlight how important it is for young startup companies. They're going to get cheap tickets, go to MedTech conferences on regulatory, on clinical, on, something else. You'll meet people. You'll meet people like Autumn, like Rian, like us, other experts that know their stuff. This is how you get into the industry if you aren't already successful within the MedTech industry. If you're new to it, go to conferences.
Absolutely. All wonderful, wonderful pieces of advice that I know many will take to heart that are listening with us today. Unfortunately, we've run out of time to cover additional questions for today. I know we covered a lot of information. I'm pretty sure we could talk for another 3 straight hours just on the questions we've covered so far. But I want to say thank you to everybody for being here with us today. And thank you, Rian, Autumn, and John, for taking the time to share your industry insights with us. As you mentioned multiple times, education is one of the biggest things you can do, and you certainly helped everybody with that today by sharing your knowledge and your experience that you've had as well. I know we couldn't get to all of the questions for today that came in as well, so make sure to head over to the MedTech Excellence community, where you'll be able to ask your questions to those speakers as well as your peers here today. The MedTech Excellent community is also where you will get access for your free copy of the 2023 MedTech Industry Benchmark Report as well. We will have the recording posted online by the end of today as well, so make sure to check in to watch any content that you might have missed, either from this presentation or any of the others that we've hosted so far as well. So thank you very much, sincerely from myself and everyone watching, for the three of you as well. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.